And we are live,
Heck yeah.
even though the video is showing nothing.
Good old YouTube streaming takes a minute to connect sometimes.
Yeah.
Gotta love it.
All right. Let me know in the chat how all the audio is and if you can see us. It keeps telling me that the video is private for some reason, and that's.
I can see us.
You can see us. All
Yeah.
right.
So I can't hear us because I have it muted because I don't want to have like an endless loop, but I can definitely see us.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm just going to check one thing.
See my dog in the background. She's like, "Who are you talking to right now?" And she's chilling right
You can
there.
see it. Yeah. All right. Everything looks good here.
Heck yeah.
Okay. So, welcome to I think this is episode 3 of the Headphone Show, and today's guest is, of course, the one and only DMS3TV.
What's up, man?
If, for anybody who doesn't know DMS, why don't you give yourself a little bit of introduction here? I think most people probably know you more than they know me.
I don't even know how to introduce myself. Golly. I'm an audio nerd who's been doing this for, golly, maybe 4 years on YouTube and a million years before that in the industry. So I review a
But
bunch of stuff. I have a lot of weird opinions, and now I'm chilling on here because more audio channels the better. I want to keep seeing this field grow, get more people into it.
you're also a filmmaker, right? Like I mean, we were just talking
Yes.
about some of that stuff.
That is my primary living. It used to be primarily in the audio industry, and now I, over time, kind of gravitated into film. But it used to be I would work in recording as a mixing and mastering engineer for a really long time.
Right.
Um, and yeah, then I started a company, DMS Multimedia, and started making films. And that's a very long story. We can get into that. That's a very long story.
Well, it's just funny because I mean that's kind of for me as well. It was always the headphones and audio were a hobby, but my like professional background. I mean, even before I was doing anything with film, I was into headphones and stuff. So
Mhm.
now that I'm doing this kind of stuff more, it's like a lot of the film work that I've done, all the stuff that I've the portfolio and stuff that I've learned over the years is becoming more and more instrumental and valuable. I'm finding.
Oh
So
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's just interestingly enough, a lot of the things kind of coincide too.
yeah, for sure.
Terms like dynamic range and all these other things seem to apply both to audio and video. You just kind of have to look at it from a different angle, but you put it all flat on paper, and a lot of these
Yeah,
things coincide in a similar way.
I was actually talking to Tyler about this. He's the other one on the stream, and I don't think you guys can actually see him, but he's there.
Yeah, sorry, I'm here.
He's with us in spirit.
Yeah, but I find that using visual representation and video and even just images as a analogy is super useful for audio stuff because I mean people are so much more visually oriented than they are for sound.
Right.
And so it's always easier, I find, to like give an explanation for something or when trying to, make an analogy or make sense of something to use some sort of visual metaphor. And so that's why, I mean, to me, it's having that background in the film stuff has been super useful. I imagine it is for you as well because it's easier to
Oh
make
yeah.
those kinds of references and draw those connections.
Well, I think this is also, I mean, that's one reason why I feel like a lot of legacy media, things like magazines, especially for the audio industry, many other industries, but audio specifically,
Yeah.
are starting to kind of see their way out because it is a visual form of media, but it's not nearly as readily accessible as stuff like, YouTube.
Right.
And I think that's also part of the popularity in databases of frequency response graphs because I feel like that's an easy way once you can visually understand it to, kind of see more of what people are talking about.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, a little bit easier than going out and always hearing everything in the world because not everybody can travel to every single audio show that happens.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody just messaged me.
I was seeing Metal 571 says he sees a Doge.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Puck.
Oh,
Show me your
I'll
phone.
turn the volume up a little bit for
Are you just-
DMS. There we
You
go.
just gonna relax back there? You're not gonna come up here? You want to come here? Come say hi. Come say hi. Hey, girl. This is my angel, the center of my universe. She's been around for longer than my YouTube channel, but she has a pretty fine-tuned ear.
Yeah. I wish I could have a dog, man. Where I am, it's hard to have pets. Oh, lost you there. Yep, we're back.
Oh yeah, my camera coming and going.
Yeah. All right, so I guess we might as well launch into this. I've turned up DMS here a little bit. I got a bunch of questions for you, but we can just sort of talk about whatever. But the first thing I want to ask you is, what is your approach to reviewing headphones? So like your process for when you say, like, from when the moment you get it to the moment you publish the review, like what are the moment that you film your review, let's say.
Okay. That process has changed a lot over the years because back, when I worked in the studio and did all that, it was easy back then because I already had an understanding of like linear phase and frequency response and a lot of things like that. But actually approaching how to best deliver things to an audience took a long time to get down. And also over time and making more and more things, obviously, I would miss details here and there and get feedback on it, like, hey, you didn't talk about this, you didn't talk about that, whatever. I still do that sometimes. Mm-hmm. I put up the Panda review and I forgot to talk about the microphone, and it was a Bluetooth headset. But that process has definitely changed a lot over time, and I feel like it depends a lot on the use case of something, because sometimes I feel like K371 is a great example of this. Someone will make a good product, but I will go hard on it specifically because of its advertised use case. Right. And try to evaluate it from that perspective. So a lot of people thought I hated the K371, and I didn't hate it. I just didn't like it for studio use. But I thought outside of that, it was great.
When you realize that something's use case, the primary use case for a product, when somebody would buy it, is not the way that you would use it, or that you don't have a use for it, how do you then approach giving an evaluation when something is just clearly not made for the way that you use headphones, or whatever it ends up being?
Well, the bright side of that is I use headphones for everything.
Right.
I literally wear I was in high school, I was headphones kid.
Right.
That was me. I always had HG205s or HG201s, little Sennheisers, or just all kinds of things, just for years and years and years. Like every waking second of my day, there's some form of music happening.
Oh, DMS, sorry, I'm told you got to turn your gain up a little bit. I think we
I'll pop it up. Here we go. Is that a little better?
Holy smokes!
Too much. Slightly down.
Slightly down.
There we go. How about that? That better?
Sure.
It's a very sensitive knob.
All right, guys. let us know how the levels are, because it's from multiple different sources here. So
hopefully I'm not destroying everyone's ears.
Just
you need those. Those are important. Gosh, I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, I use headphones all the time, nonstop, 24/7. So there are some things that I have less of a use case for, I guess. Gosh, I'm trying to think of something that I have less of a use case for.
Right.
I mean, I guess your really easy to power close backs I don't use as often, because when I'm on the go, I'm using usually something wireless. But if I'm not using something wireless, I'll carry I've got the WA11 here, or I'll carry an IDST Black Label or something like that, and those can put out enough power to drive a house. But if there were something specific, let's say the QC35-2.
Right.
That one was interesting because I've got it sitting around here somewhere. I thought, I have no use for this.
Sorry. You're clipping again.
I'm clipping again. Let's put it back down just a hair. How about that? Is that a little better?
All right. Yeah, and now I'm cranking you up on my end, so it should, as Metal 571 has told us.
Perfect.
All right, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine. QC35-2. When I first got that, I was like, I don't know how in the world to have use for this, because I thought, well, I just got it for airplanes. And I ended up, forcing myself to use it, and found myself using it all the time because of the convenience. I just put it on my head, flip it on, and start doing dishes. Flip it on, make a phone call, whatever. And I feel like a lot of that is when you don't have a specific use case for it, figure out what the normal person's going to be using it for and force yourself into their shoes and force yourself to use it in the way that they would. So I feel like with certain products or getting things in all the time, there's always lifestyle changes. Like, if I'm have towers or bookshelves in, or if I have wireless headphones or big giant wired ones, or if I'm working on studio monitors or whatever, I try to accommodate some lifestyle changes to make up for that difference. And a lot of things that are reviewed on the channel, and I can't say all things, but like most of the things that are reviewed on the channel are things that I purchase. So sometimes things will get sent in. But like I'm doing a thing on, well, I did the QC35 too, but I'm actually talking about the AirPods Pro, and that pissed off a lot of people actually. But I'm talking about that because I feel like it's an interesting and highly controversial thing. And it's not like Apple is going to send me AirPods. I went out and bought, a few pairs of those to try them back and forth. And the first thought was, well, what use am I going to have for that? Because I'm either, at the office or at home. I'm not always out and about with things in my ears. But I quickly found like, oh, wow, this is super convenient. If I'm going grocery shopping, if I'm, when I get home, it'll automatically connect to my computer and I can just start editing and I don't have to put anything on my head or, whatever. In any case where I'm not particularly concerned with maximum sonic fidelity. So it was just kind of lifestyle changes to accommodate that. But I guess on the original question, which I guess I skipped around a little bit on, about process, lifestyle changes are a part of that, depending on what the product is. Trying to understand what its specific use case is as best as I can, test it in that specific use case. And then I don't like to go into something trying to specifically identify flaws. But I'll try and use something as much as I can. And you kind of have to look for flaws to an extent because, I learned my lesson on the M1060 when that came out. I gave it a good review really fast, and then a lot of people started having problems with them. And after that, it was like, okay, I need to spend more time with these things. I need to drop it a couple times and see if the wood cracks and stuff like that. You kind of have to dig and poke and use sharp objects sometimes and figure out what could be a potential problem for some people. And I've talked to other reviewers about this. They're like, why do you go so hard on this or that when it doesn't matter? I'm like, well, something that isn't a deal breaker to you or me might be a deal breaker to someone else.
My example, at least recently, was when I was did that review of the Pro IDSD, the IFI DAC, and realizing that my use case for that is not even a little bit what I think people should buy it for if they're going to buy it. Realizing that I could get away with a much less expensive piece of equipment because I plug everything into my computer, and this is just where I do most of my listening. And I can't, but that's the problem, is that I can't say, well, it's not worth the money because I'm only using it for this one little thing, right? That it's only like maybe a quarter of the features that this thing has, right? So
and that thing too, like it's all about the features. And when I first got that thing in, I was using it as a headphone DAC, and now 99% of the time I use it as a wireless DAC, a Wi-Fi DAC for 2 channels for speakers. So it really, and then for that, I found it was like, wow, this is like amazing for that because I can plug in media to it, like SD cards, I can run Wi-Fi. It was just phenomenal for that use case, but I didn't enjoy it as much in a desk. So yeah, same kind of situation there. Very similar.
All right. Sorry, I'm realizing that there's issues with the sound again.
Endless fun, isn't it?
So now they're saying my voice is really low. This is weird. All right, guys. How's this? How are we now?
You just need like a big 32 channel mixer and just run everything analog. You can't go wrong if it's all analog.
Yeah. All right. I'll keep paying attention to this, and I'll try and mess with the levels as we go.
Are those Allegias on your head? The Focal Allegia?
Yes.
I have not tried those yet, and I've been wanting to try them forever because I liked the Alex. Everyone says it's like a closed back Alex.
Yeah.
I'm wearing the same thing.
Ooh.
It is not as, let's say, I actually think the Alex and the Clear both have a more agreeable frequency response than the Allegia. Like without any kind of EQ. because it's like when they close it off, like it's much more mid forward, let's say.
That would make sense.
And so the treble is a little bit more relaxed, and the bass, if you wear glasses, is lean.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't wear glasses, or they're like really thin on the sides, then it's there, right? It's pretty linear in the bass, but
it sounds like the
extended.
things I'm wearing right now. These little HD 6XXs.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not quite as rolled off as the 6XXs in the bass. Like it
Ah.
extends like all the way down. But if you wear glasses, it's a bit lean. But I really like them. They've grown on me because when I first heard them, even before I bought them, I was like, I don't know about this because it is a bit mid forward, and then there's like kind of like a upper mid range, like 4-ish K recession, and then the treble is it feels a little bit out of balance with the mid range. But I find that just some wide Q value boost by a couple dB at around 4-ish kHz, and then if you want to add a little bit of bass energy, it brings it in line with the Alex a bit. But it's that initial experience of when I first heard, I was like, "Wow, this is not a closed back focal clear." But then I think about like the technical performance, and it's actually pretty close. Like the detail is pretty darn good. It feels extremely punchy. Metal says Elegia is interesting, but I'm not sold on it for MSRP. Mids don't really sound right. Yeah, so like that's kind of the issue for me, is that the mids are a little bit too forward.
They're a little bit metallic, I imagine, because that's how the Alex was. A lot of people use the word metallic to describe Alex.
Yeah, a little bit to that. It's not the most natural timbre, and I think if you compare to some of the ZMF headphones, like the closed backs, Atticus, Icon, that kind of stuff, I think from a timbre perspective, they probably do a bit better. But as far as the technical, like detail, speed, kind of punch stuff, actually no, maybe not the Slam, but for the other qualities, I think the Elegia might be better. Similar to how, like, if you think about the open back Auteur versus Clear. That was always a debate, like they're both this really neutral kind of thing, somewhat neutral kind of thing, and I find the Clear is a little bit more counterclockwise tilted. But that was always the question. It was like one is the more natural sounding, and the other one is the more slightly less natural, slightly more what people describe as metallic timbre,
a little more clinical.
Yeah, a little bit, and then. But see, when I evaluate those, when I listen to those two headphones together, hey, Tyler's here. They just rearrange this.
There you go.
Right on, man. All
Perfect.
Right. Actually, why don't I just do this? So I find that even when I was evaluating the Clear, comparing that to the Elegia, I actually like the treble of the Elegia better because it doesn't have that slight sharpness to the consonant sounds. But it's one of those things I've just become to appreciate over time. I think at first I wasn't really drawn to that, and now I really appreciate the way that.
Well, some things they'll kind of grow on you and warm up over time.
Yeah,
you kind of. I guess it's that brain burn in, as they call it. But I mean, you do get used to certain sounds over time. It's like my Magnapans. They are just mid-range city, but after you listen to them for a few days and you go back to anything else, it's like just super aggressive and sharp, like any bookshelf speaker or tower in comparison. And you get used to that, but after a while, if you listen to Magnapans for 2 or 3 days, they start sounding normal.
It's the adjustment period, the brain burn-in.
Brain burn-in.
That's a very interesting part of. Well, I guess if we talk about measurements at any point, I love talking about how those things coincide, because that just adds a whole can of worms to it.
Yeah, Ben A, you got to do a little bit of EQ there, I think, with the Elegia. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I think he's right. Like, I've seen the price for that thing go really low. Like, when it's on sale, I've seen some pretty crazy prices. Enough where I think like that in my mind is like a closed back, marvel, at least for technical performance. And then anything above that, it would have to be maybe an Atticus, or I can't really think of anything else these days. Though, actually, have you DMS tried the Dan Clark Audio Aeon 2, the closed one?
I haven't. A lot of people have mentioned it to me. I'm probably going to give them a shout whenever I'm up in New York. Yeah. Just because, like, half the time I just get lost in emails because I'm setting up for Axpona and all that stuff now.
Right.
So it's just like it's been absolutely crazy. So I haven't reached out, but I'm probably just gonna walk up and be like, "Hey guys," when I get to Can Jam.
Yeah.
So
it's worth listening to because it's surprisingly detailed for treble. Like I was not expecting it to be like, to me it's like all of these different qualities, concessions
Right.
made to make it portable, to make it seals really well, to make it small and light and comfortable. I don't really have the same expectations of headphones like that I do of like Odyssey closebacks or Odyssey openbacks, right? Like the
Right.
crazy LCDX and stuff like that. But I was really impressed with the treble detail.
You know, maybe not detail wise, but frequency response wise, so far, I feel like Mr. Speakers. I will not Mr. Speakers now. Dan Clark Audio Speaker. I can't stop saying Mr. Speakers.
I know. I'm the same way.
They made a. It's hard for a lot of companies to make a closed-back planar. You look at the frequency response of like the M1060C or closed-back LCDs, and they always do really wild things.
Yeah,
and that's I got a lot of crap for giving the Ether C-Flow 2.2 a good review, but it's like, guys, this is a closed-back planar that measures a little bit weird, but it's not just like a roller coaster. Like that was kind of impressive.
So I feel like you're right on that, because the other I noticed this a lot with planar magnetic IEMs. When they close them off, I think Metal and I were talking about this as well, but when you close off the shell there, it completely messes with the frequency response. Like it elevates the upper mids to a degree that it's just horrible. And so I feel like when closing off a planar like that, you got to deal with certain things, certain challenges that I feel like with dynamic driver headphones you don't have to. It's not, you still have to deal with them, but like it's easier to do somehow. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the Dan Clark headphones don't quite have as much punch quality to them, because it's sort of like you have to balance in order to get the frequency response right. You have to make sure that it's properly damped on the backside, so that you don't get the resonances and the standing waves and all this. And the downside with that is that you lose a little bit of the impact, right? So it's a trade-off and a balance, and I think with the Aeon 2 they actually got pretty darn good. They got right with that one.
And it is interesting because, well, especially if you go back to like the Ether C-Flow and the 2.2 version of that specifically, because that's the one I had my hands on. That one you put in different forms of front side dampeners in it. Obviously the backside dampener is set in place, but you put in different front side dampeners.
Yeah.
And I know there's no textbook resolution how we determine that, but I do feel like dampeners on front side and backside can tend to have some sort of negative effects on resolution.
Absolutely.
And in a lot of cases, I feel like you have to pick between resolution and technical performance. Like frequency response and technical performance. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
And it really becomes a trade-off back and forth. But I mean, if they can hit both, that would be really cool, because I haven't really seen much of that either way.
Yeah, it's rare when that happens. I mean, I'm still waiting for the like closed-back planar market or closed-back planar concept to start getting figured out more, because again, like I mean really Dan Clark Audio is the only one. Yes, like I know that there are some others, like there's even Oppo to a certain degree, right there back when they were doing it.
Well, it depends on the range you're in, because there's cheaper stuff. Well, the Panda that everybody just reviewed.
Yeah.
Like that was more of a focus on the amplification than the fact that it was planar.
See, that's the coolest part of it to me, is the THX.
You could not tell that it was running. Yeah. If it's just sitting on your head, you could not tell. I even would put it on a rig, given it was a flat plate. It wasn't the best. I've got another rig now finally, and I'm working on some different upgrades, but the flat plate I just use now for measuring channel imbalance or noise floor. But no matter what I did out of it, I could not pick up a noise floor even with a microphone. Like there was nothing, just dead silence, which was just crazy. Because even like the Bose 700s and all those that are like $400-ish Bluetooth things that have been they've been in the Bluetooth game for a long time. You turn it on, you just hear.
Yeah, that's what I'm used to.
Yeah. And like I feel like that was like one of the crazy things about that. But the frequency response, that wasn't perfect, but it was still like, this isn't bad for a closed planar, and the technical ability wasn't horrible. It was like, this is getting there. We're really starting to get there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I think that the closed planar market is kind of, I think it's going to bust open in the next like couple of years. I think that's going to be like one of the next big trends because you see a lot more planar IEMs. You're seeing a lot
Yeah.
more, wireless stuff coming out. I think closed back planar really is going to be a big thing in the next couple of years.
What I worry about with that is, I mean, actually, I see Metal 571 talking about this in the chat a bit, but the concern with planars is that just because of the way that the transducer works, you're limited a little bit with the type of excursive force that you can have for that pistonic motion for slam and for impact, unless you have large drivers and double-sided magnets, and then you start to be able to get those higher end odysseys. But see, like, I feel like I don't know how you would condense that into something that's more manageable, that would be able to be a closed back, almost maybe not portable, but like something the size of an Elegia, for example. Like, I don't know how you'd be able to do that. And so I feel like there is still this trade-off that needs to get figured out properly. And then in situations where they've tried it, like the LCD XC and the LCD 2 closed, those ones I feel like they've ended up on the negative side, because the risk is just that they become so heavy at a certain point. It's so challenging to use. So once like, I'm looking at Dan Clark Audio again to try and like solve this and maybe make an Ether 2 closed that performs better than the Ether 2. I don't know, like something where it's this, let's say, flagship. If they can close that off and not make it ridiculously heavy, then that'd be impressive. But like Metal 571 was saying as well, is we need a LCD 1 closed for the lower end market.
Right. You know what? I'm gonna share this real quick. I just realized, because I can share a link to this too. I'm gonna share a link to that in the Patreon chat.
How's it going, Tyler? You still?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just chatting with on the chat.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
I was muting my line so you didn't hear my clicky click.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. How's it going, Martin? Good to see you. But yeah,
I actually did have one point on that. The pandas. You should definitely try the Panda.
Yeah.
The magnet structure thing I think is interesting. And like, shut me down if I'm getting into like stupid territory here. Obviously, I work with a headphone company. Like, that's my day job, is at a headphone company. And like, their thing, like one of their big things was they patented their own magnet design, which was single-sided, but they make the entire magnet out of, it's like one giant piece instead of just like a whole bunch of like individual magnets. And I'm curious to see what that would do in that kind of environment. Because I've tried, I have some here at home, and I'll experiment with them, like trying to put dampeners and stuff like that on the backside of them and see how they perform. But I would be interested to see. I think it would be really cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll happen, but I think it'd be really cool. But I'd be really interested to see how a different design like that would perform in that environment as opposed to a double-sided.
Do you know if what you're saying is that the magnetic array is not an array, it's an entire piece?
Yeah, they have like this thing they patented where they've talked about this before on their, because they do like a YouTube show. They spend like a crap ton on their magnets. Like, their magnets they spend more on than the cost of most headphones.
Do you know by any chance, are those neodymium N52 magnets, or are they N50s?
I don't know the technical details on that.
Because as far as I know, Odyssey only uses, I could be totally wrong on this, but on even the LCD4, they're only using N50s, and that's not the strongest like grade. Like, you can even get a stronger grade than that. And I remember
they spent like $5,000 on just a handful of magnets, which is kind of insane. Which is why I feel like it's possible to get away with, a single-sided design in some cases.
Yeah.
That's
what I'm thinking, right?
What they would do if they did it double-sided. I imagine that would add a lot of complexity to what they're building. But that would, I'm curious to see what could come of something like that.
I mean, even open back planers haven't truly been figured out like 100% yet either. I mean, it seems like you're always fighting that battle of, single-sided, and then how do you make up the performance that you lose by removing the one array, and you're trying to find different solutions, and everybody's got different methods of doing it. And it feels like, that's still being pushed forward, and there are gains being made in that area that I don't see as I don't see the boundaries being pushed as far with dynamic driver stuff. I mean, they are out there.
Dynamics are starting to stagnate a little bit, I feel like. That's another reason I was like, I think planar magnetics being closed is going to be a big thing in the next couple of years, because I feel like that's a largely unexplored part of audio, whereas, companies have been making dynamics in so many ways for so long. Like these headphones, these Sennheisers on my head have been around for 20-something years and haven't really changed. Like small revisions to the baffle and the construction, but driver-wise, it's basically the same thing it was when they came out, give or take. Even stuff like, Sennheiser, the revisions between the 800, the 800S, and the 820, it's like we're not seeing anything particularly new here. Like, using Gorilla Glass and a closeback, that's cool, but there's not a lot of development happening in dynamics. I mean, I guess we are seeing biocellulose dynamics getting cheaper now, and we're seeing more beryllium drivers now.
Yeah,
but it's not like crazy advancements.
I'm noticing there was so Focal's system for doing the whole voice coil motor structure is they reduce mobile mass by removing the former, like the middle cylinder, right? So they get a better, let's say, a quicker response. It's a faster response for both the beryllium driver ones and the aluminum magnesium ones. There was another company that did something similar, and it was the Clear Audio.
The Next,
yeah,
with an ironless magnesium driver.
Yeah, I feel like they're doing a similar kind of idea where they're reducing mobile mass. The ironless. It's very similar to the formerless, right? Same idea. You reduce mobile mass, you get better restorative force. And then... It's
a very similar principle, and it's interesting. They actually, I wanted to see that headphone developed further, because I remember that was at the first Can Jam I ever went to as a prototype years ago, and every time I'd go, they'd have a different prototype. And by the time it came out, there just wasn't any buzz on it anymore, because it had been, there had been so many delays in production. But it was a really interesting idea, like what they were talking about with how they could get very little modal breakup and that kind of speed out of a dynamic. It was like, well, we've seen this before in higher priced things, so it'd be interesting if they could pull it off. But it seems like the times when stuff like that does come around, that's a cool idea, a lot of times certain setbacks make it fail, like the graphene headphone.
Oh yeah,
that was going around. It was just horrible. It was a great idea. Like on paper, this makes so much sense, but something about its practical application didn't work out, and as a result, I feel like the technology is going to suffer and it's going to get a bad reputation.
You mean people won't want to do it again, given how poorly this iteration did?
Right, and I think that
there's potential, right?
There's a lot of potential in it, unless somebody like ZMF or Focal or somebody like that picks it up, because they do tend to sometimes dive into drivers of different materials like that. Well, I guess I don't know if ZMF's particularly is experimental, but I mean they do use biocellulose and beryllium, which I think is still pretty cool. It would have to be a relatively open-minded manufacturer at some point, because that'd be kind of sketchy to get into.
You'd have to. It'd be a risk.
An expensive risk.
You've heard the Verite, right?
Yes. I had one here for a really long time.
What did you think? I don't remember what your... I remember, I think I watched your review, but I don't remember what the outcome was.
Certain parts of the technical ability I feel like were impressive. Frequency response-wise, it sounded a little bit bright to me at 4 kilohertz.
Interesting.
Depending on the pads, I actually swapped out the pads and would put Otor pads on it to darken it up a little bit, just because I love things like this, like warm darkeners. Sometimes it'll vary, but I did like it quite a bit. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as some of their older biocellulose dynamic stuff. I found the beryllium to be more technically achieving, but a little bit less enjoyable. But at the same time, it's like I don't get as if I look at a ZMF headphone, I'm not looking at their stuff particularly for its technical ability. I more think of when I see a ZMF headphone, I think of like, you know, opening up a big cigar box and having like a
Right.
handcrafted piece of polished, made in America wood in front of me. And I liked the grit that the biocellulose dynamic had, especially an Icon. An Icon had, it was a little bit bright at 6 kilohertz, and I would throw on the ZMF's micro suede pads. It would make it warm as hell, but it had such a unique sound to it. It really had a grit to it that sounded great on tubes, and it was like, you know what? I like what they were doing here. And I mean, I still love what they're doing with, Verte and the direction they're headed there. But I do kind of miss the slightly less impressive technicality of the biocellulose dynamic. It's just like with tubes, there are certain things, like certain distortions and whatnot, that can be pleasant to the listener.
So this is actually, you mentioned the tubes. This is the pendant back there, if you can see it. So I'm currently, well, I'll have a review soon, but I've normally been like a solid state guy, and this is sort of the first. Like I've had tube amps in the past, but this is the first real opportunity I've had to try a full, proper tube amp,
like an OTL.
I don't think this. Tyler, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. I don't think this is an OTL amp, right?
No,
It's a rectifier tube. Yeah, but I know Amps and Sound does make OTL amps, and it would be awesome to hear that as well.
OTLs are very fun to mess around with.
Yeah, well, and that's what, like, now that I've heard the Verite off of the pendant, I now it's kind of opened up a new world for me. I'm like, I think now I have to go down the tube rabbit hole and figure that out, and because I mean, it's a totally different experience, and I really like it with the Verite. Not so much with these or some of the other headphones that I've had around, but it's really kind of changed my perspective on the whole question of tube versus solid state.
Yeah, well, they change. It's like in the lower end, I say the lower end, but in anything that I think is like under like the maybe $1,500 range for amplification, a lot of those tubes are a little more colored, and a lot of the solid states are more clinical. And as you get into the really high end, like the $2,000, $5,000 plus amps, a lot of the solid state amps tend to go for a more colored sound, and a lot of the tube amps tend to go for a more clinical sound. And it's like they're switching places. I was talking to the guys about that the other day, because this WA-11 is, it's a solid state amp, but it's like this really warm, gooey, tubey sounding solid state amp.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then I've got like, the Element over here, and it's like the polar opposite.
Is that transformer coupled, the Woo Audio?
I don't know actually the technical specifications of this thing. Actually, this just got in here. They're sending this in the Y8 because I wanted to compare them side by side, but I want to have this here because the Y8 is a little bit loose on power. So it was kind of like, I know this is going to drive things a little bit more. But I mean, you're also talking about, something being voltage driven versus current driven at that. And I've got a tube tattooed on my arm, so
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, old get this thing. Old Trio. That thing.
Nice. I wanted to get back to something that you were just talking about that actually Tyler brought up recently as well, where you're talking about the biocellulose being the thing that there's a certain nostalgia there for it, even though there's a certain quality to it that you appreciate, even though there are other technologies in dynamic driver headphones that are technically more capable and more impressive. And it reminds me of what Tyler was saying about the maybe you want to chime in on this one, Tyler, but there's a certain nostalgia and reverence for certain types of headphones and certain types of sound that make people either hold on to headphones or gravitate back to them even if they have something else that might be technically better. And I was just wondering, for either of you guys, what your take is on that kind of idea. I mean, for me, I'm specifically thinking of course, the biocellulose drivers, but then also stuff like what you're wearing right now, the 6XX. That's a headphone. What I was thinking. Yeah, it's a headphone that's really just had so much spot, like it's been in the limelight for however long, and people still go back to that headphone, even though they might have something that performs better. Tyler, what you brought this up, so I'll let you go ahead with this.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. We were having a topic in the forums there about how people can get attached to things, and even if they aren't as capable as others, it will be something that they get passionate about and can get very just that passionate about it, and will hold on to things that aren't maybe necessarily as capable as things that are higher grade. So like you could say, I was saying specifically, I think the 6XX series, right? Like that's been out for, like you said, 20 years, and people love it, and they will hold on to them like crazy, and they are very capable, and they definitely deserve the passion. But there's things that have come out since that are technically better or sound much better. I would throw in like the ZMF Aeolus is like, that was my opinion of like that the perfect upgrade path. Originally I was going with like the Elex or like the Clears and that kind of stuff. Once I got the Aeolus, I was like, oh, this is it. So
right.
But then I did hold on to those for longer than I probably ever should have, the 6XXs anyways. Not because I don't really use them. If I don't use them, then I'll move them along outside of certain things that I have certain value to.
But there's an element too of like, even if you don't use it, you there's reasons not to sell it, or there's reasons to still have it, because every time you look at it, you go, oh, that reminds me of a certain type of sound, or it brings back a kind of nostalgia for when you were using it more.
Yeah, like for instance, for me, it's I have the HD800 with the SDR mod, and that paired with my bottlehead crack with Speedball is like, every time I'm like, oh, I haven't used it in months, and I'll throw it on randomly just to be like, oh, I should sell it. And before I sell it, I want to make sure it's working. I'll listen to it. And next thing I know, it's 2 hours later. I'm like, I can't do this, And so it's stuff like that. That's what I've kind of meant. Like you start to look at things like, I haven't used this in forever, so why am I holding on to it? But then it's that you put it back on, and also those memories come flooding back, or those sentimental values come crashing in, and it's like, oh, this is special.
There's the sentimental value thing. There's an element of that I think's like a lot of the people who are maybe a lot of people who are watching reviews, or they're specifically looking for opinions about a certain product because they're looking to buy it and they want to see if it's worth the money. And the other side of things is people who will buy something or be interested in something as a matter of its aesthetics, or it's finding some sort of other sentimental value to it, where there's a reverence for the product that's not necessarily for its price to performance or the best value or anything like that. And then it's just as you say, I mean, there's reasons to still have it on the wall. I mean, I'm getting into like almost like collector type stuff where you just start collecting a ton of headphones, but like
that's
maybe
that's man.
Yeah, that's how eventually it'll be like that for me.
I was like that. I had about 80 pairs of headphones. I'm not even kidding, no exaggeration. I had about 80 pairs of headphones, and I just cleaned house one day and got rid of tons of things. But there were so many things. I sold almost all of them, and there's lots of things that I look back on and I'm like, damn, I wish I hadn't got rid of that. Like the Audio-Technica R70X. I still wish I had that thing. Certain amps. Creative Arvana Live was a great one, but I didn't actually broke it because they sound amazing and are built like crap. But I agree, there's lots of things that we'll have that, there's certainly better performing things out there in the world. Like, this, sure, the 6XX, I still think it's a great value, but there's so many things that perform better. Like, even in this room, like, I've got, like, 1266 sitting right there, and I have, LCDs over there, and then I've got, 1990s there and T1s there, but I'm wearing 6XXs. But it's... you do kind of like fall in love with certain things. Like I daily drove these for 9 years before I ended up breaking away from them for a brief period, and then got another pair. You get so familiar with it. But there's some things that different headphones do that it's easy to latch onto.
Especially especially if you're known as the headphone guy and you just constantly
nonstop. Well, I would have these on. I would even use these in the studio, not for mixing, of course. You don't want to mix on headphones, but it was really easy because these have such a narrow stage on them. The best way I could put it is, it sounds like your ear is exactly where the microphone is placed. So if I was working on mic placement for a guitar or monitoring someone who's in another room, I'd go there and I'd get the mic set up just right and go back and put these on and just sit there and be like, no, we need to move the mic an inch to the left. There was no staging to distract me from
Right.
that sort of thing. And because of that, I fell in love with it, and I got used to hearing all my music like that. And now I can't break away from it. I just love the lush mid range of it. But once you really, really, and I feel like from a reviewing perspective, this is like something that was a game changer. You got to have one headphone that you just keep all the time, that you just know so well, because there are way more resolving things. There are way more detailed things out there than the 6XX. But after using it for 9+ years, I could take it and plug it into whatever amp, and it's like you can really hear the rest of your signal chain a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
You could take a 6XX and plug it up to a $100 amp, and then plug it up to a $1,000 amp, and then plug it up to a $700 amp, and hear the slight nuances between them because you get so used to a specific headphone sound.
Well, it's just as Metal571 says in the chat right now. He says that every reviewer should own at least one HD6X0.
It's the benchmark.
Yeah.
It really is, and it's affordable to almost everybody.
It's funny. I'm actually just working on a Sundara review for
That's
the
a
new.
good headphone.
So the new revision. There's this stealth revision there.
Oh,
and it's I think that should be the new benchmark. It's obviously more expensive than the 6X0.
Right.
6XX,
I made a video about that recently. About Sundara was like it was my number one headphone under $500.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I watched that video.
And and it's the only one that I don't currently have here. And every time I think about it, I need to buy a Sundara. I just need to go on and bite the bullet and get it over with.
See, okay. So this is where you and I will depart on our opinion a little bit, but I really don't. I'm not a fan of the DT 1990 Pro for music listening, even though I see its value as a studio headphone.
Right.
I think
that goes to the previous point.
Yeah.
I evaluated it as a studio product.
Exactly.
That's smart.
So for me, the Sundara it occupies an even greater value range, because for just music listening, right? Like maybe not as a studio headphone, although it probably do just fine as a studio headphone. It just wouldn't be as applicable as something like a DT 1990 Pro.
Right.
But have you heard the new revision of the Sundara?
Real quick before you get into that little bit, someone actually mentioned it. Actually pans perfectly to that. Is how do you tell the difference between the new revision versus the old?
Right. So I actually don't know I don't know when this happened, but so this is all going to be in my video review, so I'm spoiling it here for you guys. But last summer, like in around July-ish, Hi-Fi Man sent me 2 units of the Sundara, and I think it was actually by accident, and I ended up reviewing them, and I ended up measuring both of them and evaluating both of them, and they measured the same within a certain margin of error, right, for placement, and they sounded the same, and they both had this sort of upper mid-range shout and a bass roll-off. And somewhere between then and I still really liked it. I still thought it was like an absolute awesome headphone, fantastic headphone for the price. But then somewhere in between then and maybe like a month ago, or whenever Metal did his review, they changed the pads. At least that's my I mean, the tuning is different, but I think it's because they changed the pads, because that's the first thing that I noticed when I got this new one here. I took it out of the box and I was immediately like, oh, these pads don't feel anything like the ones that I reviewed before, even though they look similar. So they look...
That would be a good thing for me, because I didn't like the old pads.
It's the focus pad, so it's got perforations on the inside. And all of it looks like it's the same, except the front part is way thinner, and the outside material feels a little bit like cheaper. But I like the result is that it's far more comfortable, right? There's no swivel on those ones, which is a pain.
Right.
But when you put this new one on, because the pads are thinner at the front, the clamp doesn't ruin your upper jaw as much.
Right.
And so it's a lot more comfortable. And then that also evened out the frequency response so that it's much more, let's say, linear on common compensation targets. So in my mind, it's like it's the new benchmark headphone for, like, if you can spend more money than the HD6XX, the Sundara is the next thing that you look at, and then everything up until, like, I don't know, maybe 600 or 700. I don't know. I have to think about that a little bit more, but
Right.
it occupies a huge range there. For
It's a
me.
pretty fantastic headphone. Comfort was
Yeah.
my only problem I ever had with it because the inner diameter, the
Oh,
pads.
yeah.
So that, and then the I could never get the headband to extend down far enough for me because I have a monster head. Which, I mean, even like
It
these,
doesn't
you can
look like it.
Oh, I know, but here I'm going to take these off for a second. Look how far these 6XXs are extended. Like, and this like pulls up on my ears sometimes.
Interesting.
Actually, you know what? I can clamp it in a little bit more.
There's probably an index there.
It's higher than that, and then it's just like that's as far up as I can go.
There's probably an index for like how far down the side of your head your ears are.
Right.
And that is determines the ratio for how
I also have to
extended
wear
your
like
ears are.
large hats and stuff like that. Like people are always like, "Oh, it doesn't look like it on camera," but they don't realize that I'm a skinny dude, but I'm like 6 feet tall, and my head is huge.
There was somebody in a Discord, I can't remember who it is, and he's probably watching, so this will be funny, but he described his head as I think it was like a pumpkin on a toothpick.
Yeah, that's kind of how I am. Actually, you know what? Here, I have these sitting next to me. I'm gonna swap this real quick, so I can't hear you for a
Sure.
second. But then I got a point I'm gonna make real quick.
Sure.
These are coming off my head. I'm putting these giant things on my head
Yeah.
because, gosh, these look funny on camera. All right, this is going in here. All right, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
I can hear you too. On my head, this looks almost like a normal-sized headphone. This is not a normal-sized headphone at all.
That's the 1266 TC.
Yeah. It usually looks huge on most people, and for some reason, it almost looks normal on me. It's different because I have vegan pads on it, but still.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Well,
ridiculous.
that was one of the issues that I had with the headphone, HEDD, head audio.
Yeah, I've been looking into that thing actually a lot
Have you heard it?
recently. Not enough to have an opinion.
It's I really liked it. I don't know. Tyler, it took you a little bit to get into it, right?
The headphone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, initially it was, it had some kind of weird quirks. Like, it's very, like, it's like right here, but then it goes really far wide. So coming off of the SR1A, it's, and that's the other problem. My brain break-in was on the SR1A, so I was just like, and then I put that on, and it's my instant reaction was like, oh, it's not that great. I don't understand what the what everyone's been chatting about, I guess. But then after having the brain burn in for about a week, I'd say it was really amazing how especially when you look at the price to performance. So kind of talking like analyzing it for what it is, rather than like the like what its use case is, like how DMS is saying. It's, to my opinion, it's going to be a really tough one to beat in the planar world, under $2,500, if not maybe even a little bit higher, because it's fantastic headphone. So
It's interesting. Do we consider the pleated driver in that? Do we still consider that a planar?
yeah, and that's the other thing. Like it's a unique technology. I'd almost consider it more along the lines of like how SR1A is not. I wouldn't consider that a planar. It's rivet. Like there's
Right.
The AMT, it's for those of you guys in the chat wondering, the headphone uses what's called air motion transformer technology, and they did this for the tweeters in their speakers, and this was like it's really good for treble resolution essentially. And what they did when turning it into a headphone was that they developed this technology with, rather than having a fold, imagine that the diaphragm for a planar magnetic headphone is like now folded, and you get rather than a pistonic motion for to create the air, it instead is kind of like bellows for stoking a fire. It's more like a breathing motion. Actually, here's a good example. So it's like one of these, right? So when this closes, you get really, really fast air motion coming out, even though it's this motion here isn't what's producing the air relative to the motion here. You're getting much faster air as a result of the squeezing. And so that's the idea with AMT. But what they did when they put it into headphone tech is they changed the geometry in order to get the linear frequency response, or something like a linear frequency response. They changed the geometry for the folds, so the folds are of different sizes and different distances, and that allows them to get much better bass extension than just what they might be able to do for only tweeters, for example. And so I guess the technology, in my mind, that's very interesting, but I still worry, like, because as Tyler was saying, this is definitely a something where everybody else who's trying to release headphones at around that price or higher, they need to watch out for and pay attention to. The downside is that in order to do this, it's got to be pretty heavy, and so really the biggest challenge is, like, I don't know how it would be possible to produce something like that with that type of driver technology at a lower weight, right? Because that's always the thing that I worry about is, the weight is, for even planars that are like flagship planars, the weight is just, it's too much, and it always has been. So these days, when they're now figuring out, okay, with planars, like we can reduce the weight, we can get it smaller, lighter, more comfortable by taking away one of the magnets or something like that. I don't know how that would work for something like AMT, so we'll see on that. But it is still fascinating, like, I think. And I was also told that in order to, I can't remember exactly the term for it, but in order to actually produce that technology in headphone form, they had to make the air gap for the drivers way larger than they would than you would for something like a conventional, like, planar or dynamic driver. The air gap for, I think it's where the actual diaphragm is, because otherwise, I'm sure it has something to do with the way that the air flows. But in any case, I'll leave that to.
For some reason, when you said air gap, I started thinking flange distance, and my brain went to cameras. It's what we were talking about earlier. Everything
is
audio
visual,
just kind of starts to.
Actually,
I'm interested to see where that goes, because if we do still consider that a planar, then that's like what we were talking about earlier, where planar is really the next field that needs a lot of innovation.
Well, the only thing that reminds me of a planar is the sound. Like, to me, it sounds like a nanoscale planar, like one of those really high-end ones. But as far as the technology goes, I don't think it's anything like a planar. Like, it's the physical motion for the air that's being produced is different. It's not. I think, like, they were saying that. And take it for what you will, but they were saying that the ratio for the amount of air that gets moved to the movement of the diaphragm is something like 4 or 5 times what it would be if it were a standard pistonic motion for the diaphragm. And that's, again, because of something like, it's this idea where it's kind of like bellows for a fire. You're only moving it this much, but it's producing air at a speed that's way faster.
Right.
But we'll see where it goes.
For that, I've seen that work well with speakers.
Yeah.
So it's hard, though, because like cases like that, even if I hear something, I try to keep my mouth shut on it until I've spent time with something at home these days, because I know that if I say either way, it's just everything is just. I'm not trying to toot my horn here, but I know if I say one way or another my opinion on something, people are gonna be like, oh, DMS said this is great, or DMS said this is terrible, so I kind of have to shut up about something until I can
There's a
have a really solid opinion. Yeah. It's the absolute worst.
Well, I'm actually. Someone asked in the last one we did, what's the biggest disconnect between the viewer and the, when you're producing a video for reviewers and the viewers of it. And I think that's one of the areas where it's it's a challenge, because you don't want someone to take the wrong message from your video. That's always the biggest thing, because then
all the time.
Yeah. Then that goes down the wrong track.
Well, yeah, it was. I mean, this happens to me. This happens to Zio, because we've talked about it before too.
Yeah.
Because he said in his original video about the SHP 9500s, which I made a video talking very poorly about the SHP 9500s. But originally in his video, he said, I feel dumb for owning 600s, HD 600s, because these exist and they do similar things for a lot cheaper. And everyone took that and said, Zio said that the HD 600 is better, or the SHPs are better than HD 600. They'll take everything you say and pump it to 11,
Yeah.
rank it past that. Like there were times I don't even remember know a specific example, but I'll say like, one good or one bad thing about a certain product, and everyone will think that I instantly love it or hate it and ignore everything else said in the video.
It's the one thing that you don't like about the thing becomes now that thing's calling card or the message that everybody
Yep.
seems to take.
And people will take that and quote you on it and forget everything else you said, and then you become associated with that quote instantaneously.
Exactly. Yeah.
Again, the K371, just because that's a fresh one. Everyone says that I hate that thing, and I'm like, I don't hate it. I promise I don't hate it. I gave it crap for being called a studio headphone, but it's not bad. But if you watch the video, there were things where like I said I had critiques, and then I was like, but it does amazing here, and it does amazing here, and it does amazing here, and it'd be great for someone who wants this.
Yeah.
But all that's gone. It's just DMS hates it. That's how
I
it
wanted
goes.
to switch gears here a little bit because you said something earlier that you were spending a lot of time in recording studios.
Yeah.
And maybe you mentioned this already, but are you a musician?
Yeah, I got a little piano back here. I guess
that would
start with that. Yeah. When I was growing up, my family worked in the music industry, not in recording or anything, but in live music.
Mm-hmm.
My dad had a company where he would set up like live sound and projectors and stuff like that. So, like line arrays and cameras and projectors for concerts and all that stuff. So he did a lot of live sound and live video. And my mom toured with Reba McEntire for a long time. So I grew up in a really musical household, and we had an old upright piano because my great something granddad, I don't know, whatever was in the 1800s, sold pianos, and we kept one in the family since then. It was a 1823 Chickering upright grand.
Cool.
Upright grand. What am I saying? Upright piano. My brain's just upside down. I haven't had coffee in a while.
It's the old timey pianos that you see in like Western saloons.
Yes, upright. So you can put it right up against the wall. It doesn't take up a whole room.
Yeah, that's what we had.
I was playing that as a kid a lot. We'd kept it in shape, and it looked like it was new because the family had taken care of it from generation to generation. We had that and guitars, and I played in bands, and I played drums, and I played woodwinds, and I learned everything I possibly could. And piano stuck the most. And I was making my own music for a really long time. It was the first career that I was really passionate about getting into, which is, when I look back at it and look at the numbers that I was getting of like song plays and stuff, this was back before streaming services. So it would have been like, people buying songs on iTunes and whatnot. I look back at it and I'm like, oh my God, why did I stop doing that? That was getting better numbers than my YouTube. So I used to do that. And then my friends knew, they were like, oh, this guy, he makes music. He can help us produce our stuff. So like kids from school, they'd come over and we would, I saved up for a long time, for years, and got myself a USB mic and I put it in a closet and nailed blankets to the walls. My mom got really pissed about that. And we would record these guys, rapping and stuff like that. And they'd put their stuff on SoundCloud. And I started learning to mix and produce. I would record things on like tape. And sometimes I would, if somebody had a MacBook, they'd bring it over and I'd use like GarageBand or something. I started getting outboard gear then, it started like, cause people would come over and they'd give me like $20 and we'd record for the day. And eventually I got like, a preamp for my tube, or like a tube preamp, sorry. And then like, a little microphone. I think it was like a P120 because I have P220 here now, similar one, but, and it, just kept getting things over time. And eventually it started turning into something. And then after high school, I got myself just more studio gear, and it just eventually turned into like a full-time thing. And it kept building and kept building. And eventually I took a house and like basically gutted some rooms and turned one room into a control station. And we put holes in the wall and ran a snake into another room and into another.
Yeah.
And set up treatment and stuff. We had a room for vocals and a room for drums and guitars, and just built this full-on studio out of it over time. And it just kept going. And I still used a combination of digital tools, but I was a really big analog then. I didn't like using a computer if I didn't have to, so I used a big Mackie 8 bus, 32 channel 8 bus mixer, and would have 3 ADAT machines. Which
Yeah.
you familiar with ADATs?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'd have if anybody doesn't know ADATs, it's essentially it can record 8 channels at a time. So I'd run all my sins out of the mixer into that, and I would use plate reverb and tube pre's and all that stuff, and record everything analog into an ADAT set that's all synced up, and then go back later and play it back through the ADAT set back into the mixer, and I could mix it like that and apply whatever effects I needed to outboard, and then record the master on reel to reel. And I did that for like a really long time, and I loved doing it. Which is, I mean, what's funny is a lot of people that came through weren't even bands. It was usually acoustic artists, or there was a crap ton of, as weird as it is, a crap ton of people in Nashville that were rappers, which was neat because some of my best artists I ever worked with were like these like hip hop artists who had almost no following at the time, and I was blown away. There was one guy actually.
Yeah.
You care if I shout out a guy on this show?
No, shout out by all means. Go ahead.
There is a man that I worked with, and if he's probably seen it at some point. Drew Brazier is his name. I don't remember what he calls himself, but Drew Brazier is who he is. When he first came in, he was so bad.
How do you spell the last name there?
Brasher.
Okay.
He calls himself, I don't remember what his like artist name is, but when he first came in, he was really bad. And he came back, and he came back, and he came back. He would come back like 3 times a week, spend every dollar he made, because he was like working, I think, delivering pizzas or something. He would come back and spend every dollar he made getting studio time. And every time he'd be like, how was that verse? What can I do to make it better? And stuff like that. And he did that for like 3 or 4 years straight.
Wow.
Yeah, several times a week. And he became one of the best lyricists that I had ever heard. Really, like some of the songs that he's made that he never put out, I'm just like, I hear them and I'm like, dude, this should be everywhere. And then he's like he's like a history nut for hip hop.
Yeah,
like all that stuff. But like, it was really impressive because like as time went on, he started working with me when my studio was small, and he kept going through all the way until it was at its peak. And I think he progressed at a skill rate at the same rate in which I was getting more gear and things were getting better. And a lot of my technical understanding during this period, especially during the growth, didn't necessarily come from any particular formal educational background, but a lot of it was learning with like hands-on with these artists, and kind of like learning to direct them and help them get better at their craft while I get better at my craft. And I had a lot of good mentors in the music industry. There's some guys who owned recording studios in Nashville who I'd go and sit in with the sessions. I went to Dark Horse a lot, which is just a phenomenal studio. And they'd let me sit in and I'd be like, okay, how'd you get this sound? How'd you get that? Why do you use a linear phase EQ instead of a parametric EQ, and all this other stuff? And eventually it started making sense. I remember the first time I ever used a compressor in my life. I didn't know what a compressor was. And I would sit there and I would play back the track before I knew how to use a compressor. And I would move the fader up and down with their voice to try and get it level in case it would be too loud or quiet. And I would do it like 4 or 5 takes over again to get it perfect. And the guy was like, bro, you can just put one of these in your rack and turn this knob and it does it for you. And it just blew my mind. So this is way back. This is before it got really successful, but like still it was interesting learning things in that fashion, and kind of a non-traditional fashion. And that kind of, I guess, built the framework for my technical understanding of a lot of audio, was either stuff that I learned hands-on or learned with.
Tyler and I were talking earlier about how the benchmark that anchors a lot of opinions for when we're evaluating headphones and stuff like that,
right?
It is the hearing things. At least, I don't know, maybe it's not like this for you, but for me, it's definitely hearing things either live or in those environments where you would be recording them. And then that is always the wall against which everything else is checked.
Yeah.
Is it like that for you as well? Like where a lot of your studio experience, you would have heard, whether you were recording yourself or just being in that environment, you would have heard a lot of stuff the way that that the recording actually happens. Does that influence the way that you then see headphones? Does that influence then the way?
Yes.
Yeah.
It really does, because a lot of it comes down to technique as well. And this, I'll bridge this connection, I guess. But it just from the basis, when you record a lot, let's say you record a lot of people who are playing guitar,
Yeah.
you get used to, what a guitar is going to sound like recorded on certain microphones, what sort of microphone placement you need for different pickup patterns, and how if you EQ it different ways, the different sounds you're going to be able to pull out of it here and there. And then you start to recognize that in music, and you'll be like, okay, this guy's clearly set up a guitar in this way, but I hear more of this than this, or less of this certain sound, and it'll be things that, it doesn't sound like it's placement, it doesn't sound like it's EQ or compression. So what you're hearing then, is an artifact or a side effect of the equipment you're listening on. A lot of it comes from that experience with recording vocals, recording drums and guitars, and knowing how certain things are produced. And I like to go back and look at the music that I'm listening to. This is a big part of my analysis process. I forgot to mention earlier. I like to go and look and see what engineer was recording any given track or an album, see who mixed it, who mastered it, and try and research their style and see what information I can find out about them, so I can know more about, how they mix things, how they produce things, what sort of equipment they're mixing on, what sort of techniques they use, whether they're using algorithmic synthesis or simulation, if they're using simulation reverb, or if they're using actual physical plates, or if they're using mic talls, or how they're doing different things. And having an exact understanding of how the music is created and where it comes from really helps to better understand where certain sounds are coming from, where certain changes are coming from, and how those changes are affected by the gear we're listening through, whether it's the source or the actual headphone itself.
That reminds me of one of the reasons why a lot of people who are into jazz music will follow the ECM recordings. All of those ECM or EMC, I think it's ECM. Anyways, it's because it's recorded and mastered in a certain way.
Right.
And so, I mean, not all of it is necessarily what everybody's going to like, but being able to latch on or attach to a certain recording style, I find, like one that you like, I find yields pretty good results as far as the quality of music. But I've also encountered certain recording styles that, I'm thinking of close mic recording, like when they have the mic way too close.
Right.
There's a certain style to that I can understand why it's appealing as well. So, it just reminds me of that a little bit, where it's
Well, we develop preferences definitely based on that. There are certain jazz recordings that I really like, but I tend to gravitate more towards live ones for critical listening. Either live ones or ones that are produced by certain people that I've heard a lot of their live stuff. Like Cecile McLaurin-Salvant is an insanely talented jazz singer.
Yes.
I could go on and on and on. But like this album, Dreams and Daggers, there's this album in particular, the last song, I think it's the last song, is recorded in a jazz club. And I'm familiar with the microphones it was shot on. I know about, how the space was treated. The mixing engineer, Todd Whitelock, mastering engineer Mark Wilder, have done some really crazy projects in the past. And, in a situation of an artist like this who's just big enough that you can hear really high quality recordings of them, you can be familiar with the mixing engineer, the mastering engineer, and the place that it was recorded at. And how the artist, tends to treat a microphone. Like there's tons of videos online of how Cecile will, she knows how to use a mic. Like when she gets loud, she knows to push back, and she has very good control over it. You can directly see her mannerisms when performing live or recording, but especially performing live, it makes it a lot easier because I feel like there's a lot more small imperfections that you can find. And if you're familiar with how these people are producing and how the singer performs, it's a little bit more predictable, I suppose, how these imperfections are going to show themselves and how you can hear them and how some may be intentional.
Mhm.
I don't know. Yeah, and there's something you kind of build a bias off. So for me, it's like I always like from familiar production backgrounds because of that.
I always get into situations where I'm listening to music from a certain recording artist that I like, and then you can tell exactly when they switch engineers, like
Yeah.
one album to the next, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I don't like that style anymore, or I like this better, or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I could go on a good example of that. So I'm a big fanboy for Mac Miller's late work before he passed. And the albums Swimming, which was the last thing he released alive, and then his most recent one, Circles, which is this posthumous release that came out this year, both of which he did in collaboration with John Bryan, who is just insanely talented multi-instrumentalist and producer. And you can tell the production between those two albums was drastically different because Circles, the more recent one, while Swimming was collaboratively produced between the two of them, Circles was all the mixing and mastering was done in its completion by John Bryan after Mac had passed. And you can tell the difference in mixing style between them as a result of this. And I mean, which isn't to say anything bad about the deceased artist because they're a phenomenal musician. You can tell that John was a more seasoned engineer.
I have to look into these artists because I I see Tyler nodding over there. I'm just like, I don't know who that is.
Oh man, you have Tidal, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna send you a link.
Yeah,
in Discord.
send me links to this stuff because I got to check it out.
This album is just great. It's just a great album.
When we're reviewing headphones, like it's like the same test tracks, like however many it is, right? Like,
right.
So actually, that was a good segue. I was on mute. I was talking, but someone actually asked earlier in the chat, like what everyone uses for their music playback, so streaming versus FLAC, that kind of thing. And so I know for me, I don't consider myself a reviewer per se. But I use Spotify for all my Spotify Premium for all my music like finding and that kind of stuff, and then I use Qobuz Studio for all my like if I'm really wanting to listen to music and actually get into the detail and like hear it at its more best, I guess. So what would be yours, DMS? Like, what is your? Is it Tidal? Is that it or?
All right.
yeah.
Just
touche.
They just keep going endlessly. This is I've got a crate of records in the other room, but I use Tidal anytime that I'm on the go, and anytime I can, I try to get first edition cuts of vinyls. And I know that vinyl is not a perfect format,
but it sounds, and it's the experience of it.
Yeah, it's a far from perfect format. But I've been listening to records my whole life. That's what I grew up on, was records, and it's just the format that I am the most familiar with. And I need to upgrade my record player really badly, but I don't know. It's like where are they? These that I took off my head earlier. It's something that you just become familiar with. For a lot of critical, if I get really into critical details and I don't want to have to worry about pops or cracks or little things here and there, if I really just want to get right down to the bone, I will use Tidal.
For sure. Actually, that's an interesting question because I also use Tidal, but I was reading up on apparently the Tidal player is not actually ideal. Like this not Tidal Masters or MQA or any of that, but like specifically Tidal's player is not ideal. And if you use Rune, you bypass Tidal's player for sound quality. Like apparently it's something. Yeah, apparently because it's supposed to be 16-bit at whatever for most of the material, but because of Tidal's player, somebody actually tested this and it ended up being somewhere between 13 and 15-bit. And so it wasn't actually giving you the best quality. And then when you ran it through Rune, it would use Rune's player, but Tidal's library. And
I think
so
it
you can
depends
get
on
all
your
the same
hardware too.
Yeah, that too. The one I wanted to mention though, the one, so like I use Rune for a lot of it when I'm doing that kind of stuff. But
Hmm.
the one thing that I noticed with Rune that really is like they need to fix this before Rune is like universally adopted or recommended. They need to fix their exclusive mode because they have so if you run it in ASIO mode,
Hmm.
it's going to be exclusive. But if you run it in Wasapi mode, it's you have the option of making it exclusive or not exclusive. You can turn it off. And the problem is when you turn off exclusive mode, you introduce resample artifacts like crazy, and it doesn't
Right.
matter if you match it to your hardware. It doesn't matter if you get it perfect, and you can even go and like I've gone on the Runes forums and I've been like, hey, what's going on here? Why is it producing these resample artifacts? And it's like very noticeable. And they say,
Yes.
yeah, it's their solution is no, just run it in exclusive mode. It's like that doesn't help you if you're in the process of listening to something and then you want to switch to a YouTube video and then you want to switch to something else from a different application.
Hmm.
It's only if you're listening exclusively to music that Rune is like great for.
That's the
Um,
biggest problem that I have between when I like to use. That's why I love to use vinyl more for personal listening and digital
mhm,
more for analytical listening, is because of quantization noise.
yeah,
Um, Quantization noise is something that we just never notice, but when you sit there and you mix a song for 2 weeks straight and are just
yeah,
listening to it straight in Logic, it's the moment you export it, even as a lossless file, you hear quantization noise
mm,
instantly because everything is being, well, I say lossless, but the second you put it down to 1644.1, you
mhm,
can hear that there is things are being slightly retimed. Um, which sounds absurd. I know this is like fractions of milliseconds we're talking here,
Yeah.
but it's just like taking speakers and having to treat your first reflections in a room to eliminate timing issues. Um, it
It's kind of,
becomes more noticeable the more that you spend time with a particular track and are able to hear the difference side by side. But most of the time, no one's going to be sitting there listening to a track in Logic for 2 weeks and then hearing
mhm.
a final master of it. You don't people don't have the opportunity to hear that. They only hear the final master. So it's I feel like uncommon for people to have to pick out quantization noise, which is why I feel like it's not a big problem for the general public because people don't have a reference point for something that doesn't have that unless they're particularly listening to vinyl.
So what you're saying then is there would be a bigger difference between any recorded music and before that, the that stage, than there would be between something like 16-bit and 24-bit, for example.
Yes, I because
Or
you can export a track
yeah, I agree.
at 1644.1 and you can export it at 24.192 or whatever.
sure.
Um, and oftentimes, in my personal experience, oftentimes I don't find an audible difference between uh, these two sample rates when I export. The
Sometimes
biggest thing
sometimes
audibly,
volume or other things come in, and it's like you
right?
convince yourself that there's a bigger difference than there actually is, if you can even tell.
Historically, people will, if they hear a louder track, they think that it sounds better.
Yeah.
But realistically, side by side, I think 1644.1 is fine.
Mhm.
I don't see any problem with it. But quantization, because are you familiar with what quantization specifically does?
No, no, no.
So when you quantize something, you are essentially snapping it to a grid, and the grid is very large when you're in a DAW, a digital audio workstation like Logic or something like that. So you have X amount of spaces per second that obviously notes and things can fit into. And the same thing works with the sample rate. But when you are exporting it to a file, you have to take all these individual portions of waves and sounds and they are averaged out. So it's like rounding up or rounding down. Like, okay, if it's right here, this is going to get rounded up and it's
Yeah.
going to go into the next space, or it's
Mhm.
going to go back into this space. And every single little bit of information in this entire piece will get slightly retimed forwards or backwards based off the averaging. And
Yeah.
different DAWs have different averaging algorithms to put things in different places. And you can actually run through different mastering suites that will have different algorithms for quantizing things in different ways. But everything, when it is exported to a final deliverable digital form, is quantized in some way.
Given that digital formats are that's just what we're everybody's going to be listening to and is listening to. I mean, maybe there's a few of folks like you who are got the vinyl collections, but digital formats are the way of the future and the present. What if I feel that digital formats currently are still in some ways a hangover from CDs and the quality that you got from CDs to a certain extent.
Right. That was the standard for a long time.
Yeah. If we could get a digital format, say we just started everything from scratch and we could just magically be like, okay, here's what the digital format is now. Would there be one that would be able to sound better than what we currently have? And is there one that would allow us to get past that quantization issue?
On a technical perspective, and this is not my endorsement of this particular, but from a technical understanding, DSD is the closest, because it's more of a direct stream of unquantized information. But the problem is that almost all DSD is taken from a quantized file that's reconverted into a stream. And there are things like the iDSD that will take that and will do DSD remastering, but it's just trying to undo something that's already been done. You can't take a piece of paper that's been slightly charred and unchar it. Unless you're taking the reel-to-reel information and directly transcribing it to DSD, which even then DSD, the file sizes are a problem. The hardware compatibility is a problem. If there was a way to more directly do that and mitigate these problems, I think that it's a good format, but it's such a complicated format that even I personally don't use it.
Yeah.
That convenience factor.
Well, that's just it, right? Like even when because I used to have a huge FLAC library back when I cared about that. Still have it somewhere.
Right.
But, that was one of the things is I realized that I could... It was the convenience factor of being able to get all this stuff. And that made me switch to, Spotify and Tidal and everything else because I was like, I can't get all of this. And, like, do you remember there used to be this wonderful website called what.cd? I don't know if you remember that.
I don't actually.
Okay, so what.cd used to be... It was taken down because it was basically like they just had tons of digital files, but they were high quality rips, right? It was like find a way to, and a lot of them actually ended up being vinyl rips and stuff like that. And it was really interesting what they had, and they had this huge catalog of stuff. And I remember discovering it and being like, oh, this is awesome. And then it got taken down, right? It got shut down. And when it went away, all of my habits changed. It was like, I no longer have access to this crazy library. They had stuff that you couldn't find on Tidal or Spotify. And I just had to be like, well, I guess I just can't listen anymore. And I can't find the stuff that I want. And, but part of me always wished that there could be a Spotify or Tidal or even something like Rune where you could just have access to the highest quality files or even the vinyl rips or anything that you would want, just like that. And I feel that they still haven't really gotten there because they're still squabbling over who has the rights to whatever for streaming and whatnot. So I'm still looking for that one day
so
to make it
vinyl rips. So vinyl rips to me, there's a problem with them. There's a big problem.
I completely agree. I feel it completely defeats the purpose of listening to vinyl in the first place.
It does, because vinyl has flaws, and you're mixing the flaws of vinyl with the flaws of digital, and I feel like it's just creating this it's the flaws of both formats put together into the worst possible combination.
Yeah,
that's when people are like, but my library is only vinyl rips, and it's like, that's fine. Well, if you enjoy it, that's cool, but
you also have to have really good gear to do it proper. I mean, and it's expensive gear to do it proper, right? To do it true.
Exactly. It really is.
I felt like you would, if you were doing it, you would inevitably end up with the imperfections that, it just, to me, it was like the most counterintuitive, like, why would you do something like this? Because it's kind of like, it would be like running a tube amplifier through solid state,
right?
Like making a perfect transparent version or a perfect transparent chain within a tube amplifier.
Right.
Just it would defeat the purpose of it.
Well, transparency, there's an interesting bit. I'm going to take these in my head because they're giant still. I was just trying to make a point earlier. Oh, there we go. I can't hear anybody. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
start
I
from
learned.
that point.
I learned
Transparency
not
is
to.
an interesting thing because we don't have a direct standard as to what is transparent. I should be able to hear you guys again now. We don't know what our brain is going to do to the sound after it goes through the anatomy of our ears and deals with the different gains that our differently shaped anatomies are.
Yeah.
So our idea of a reference standard or of a transparent sound is going to be different from person to person, but also perfect transparency might not be the best thing because I feel like real life is not perfectly transparent. I don't listen in free field. No one on Earth listens in free field because it doesn't exist on our planet, in our atmosphere. And a perfectly clinical recording in a studio, or even a recording of a live band, you're listening to how it was recorded as well as how your room sounds.
Yeah.
So there's always something altering it in one way, shape, or form. It just depends on if you like the alterations or not. That's when things get more subjective versus objective, because objectively, there's a lot of things that are high end and sound amazing, but are not technically high fidelity based off our understanding of what that means. I'm adding a little bit of ISO right here.
That's a good
brighten it up some.
Description. It reminds me, Tyler and I, again, we were talking about this even just a couple days ago. Just once again, drawing the analogy to the visual space, where, are you familiar with the concept of bump mapping for textures in video games?
A little bit, vaguely.
So, and you guys in the chat probably know more about this than I do, but but basically the idea is you have a two-dimensional texture that through this technology called bump mapping, you make it look like it's three-dimensional. And technically, it's not perfectly transparent because the texture is just two-dimensional. But because of this additional enhancement, it increases the sense of realism and immersion. And Tyler and I were just talking the other day about this, where, I mean, that's kind of like the parallel I like to draw with something like a tube amplifier, where it introduces this, again, people like to use the term imperfections, but it introduces this sort of holographic 3D quality that maybe technically isn't as, quote unquote transparent, but it enhances the experience. Or there's a chance, depending on the rest of the chain and whatever headphones you have and the rest of the system, that it can enhance the experience.
I think my camera just died or something.
Oh, well, we still have the volume or the audio, so battery exhausted.
Oh, well, there's the problem.
It's too tired.
Yeah, you know what? 1 second, I'm gonna grab another battery just real quick. Set my headphones down.
So Tyler, I'll let you run with that for a bit.
Yeah, and I'm not as versed as you or DMS as far as like the technical realm, but for me, like when I listen to headphones, like, so for instance, if I throw on my Verites or the Ellis and I use them on a solid state versus say I throw them on the tube amps or one of them, or the pendant like you have right now, it just felt like there was more like weight or more. It seemed like there's more between the lines, if that makes sense. Like, so like it seemed like there's just a lot more like just life to the sound, everything. It just brought everything up more, or it took it to 11, I guess. But and that's my opinion of it. Like, so if for me, it just seems like when you have that, like with the tube specifically, it seems to do that, where it gives you that extra, like almost that it highlights the stuff that's happening in between the lines, where it just gives it more life to the sound.
All right, I think I'm back.
You're back, yeah. I find it I notice it more in the lower frequencies, like the let's say 100 to 200 hertz. Like, I feel like I notice, so again, instruments that occupy those spaces and even below, like upright double bass, stuff like that, I feel that I can hear more body to them when I listen through something like the Pendant compared to the Phonitor X. And like the Phonitor X, like that's a really nice solid state amp, right? But like to me, I actually think I prefer the Verite here out of the Pendant, which I was saying this earlier, just because of that extra quality that it gives it, and it's one of the reasons why now I need to figure that out a bit more.
Well, you can kind of. Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say the synergy too. You have to look at synergy of things too. I think that's a big piece of how we hear things. I mean, there's the how the DAC to the amp to the headphone, how that synergizes together is also something that a lot of people don't really take into account. Like you could have the most neutral amp in the world, but if you have another super neutral bright, like let's say if you put like I'm not, like I said, I'm not the most technical person, but like the DT 1990s or the 880s or whatnot, known for, or even the HD800s, known for very bright headphone, right? And you throw them onto like the THX, any of the THX solid states, it's going to be a very bright experience, So I think that's something to
you're
take
getting
into
all
account.
the brightness.
Yeah,
Every single bit of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's so somebody's gonna be like, oh, this could be garbage. They like, oh, it's so bright, it hurts my ears, it's piercing. But then it's like, well, why not throw it on? Like, so when I throw my 800s, like I mentioned earlier, I throw those on the bottlehead, and it's like I can get lost, Where if I throw it on like the solid states, it can be like my monitor. When I throw it on that, it's like it's good, but it's a little bright.
Some of the idea behind like I find synergies really interesting, because sometimes you have synergies like exactly that, like what you just mentioned, where you have a headphone that has a certain characteristic and then you want to pair it with something that balances out that characteristic a little bit. But there's other times where you want to I feel like, for example, when I use a low efficiency planar and I give it a ton of current or something like that, where it's almost like you're doubling down on certain qualities that you like. So, for example, one of the things I like about planars is that they're very fast, right? They're very tight sounding. And I put them on an IHA 6, and it's like, that's just even more like, I get even more of that quality that I like, right?
Yeah, like I would never put a planar on my bottlehead. Well,
no, you wouldn't want to.
But like when you throw it with on my monitor, like I throw it on that, and it's like, you're exactly that we just mentioned. Like it's just, there's that synergy also where it's just like chocolate on chocolate, right? Like you get the double fudge brownie ice cream,
I feel that I know I noticed that more with like the technical qualities, where it allows certain technical qualities to shine through a little bit more strongly, whereas the ones where I kind of counterbalance them a lot, it has to do with the music that I listen to, and then also the other characteristics of the rest of the gear. So like warm headphones, if I'm listening to jazz music, I won't listen to warm headphones, right? If I'm listening to maybe some more upbeat music, like pop or rock or something like that, then maybe I'll use some warm headphones,
right?
Just because I don't want to be doubling down in that situation for tonality, right? And making the sounds that are already warm even warmer.
Yeah, there are combinations you can throw together that'll really, really. You can make stuff sound pretty harsh and pretty unenjoyable with just like the right combinations of gear, and that can individually be great equipment, but they just don't work together.
I've probably been listening to the DT 1990 wrong all this time.
Hey, you never know. Well, the 1990 the Bayers in general, interesting tuning. The reason that I particularly liked the 1990 as a studio headphone, and I like bright things generally as studio headphones, this being the one exception because I feel like this is a reference for mic placement. But I like bright studio headphones for studio use because you are forced. It's just like the the Yamaha NS10.
No, I don't.
You look in any studio and you will see a pair of Yamaha NS10s in there somewhere. And the reason is because that thing is the worst speaker on the entire planet. And if you can make it sound good on that, your mix is going to sound good on anything. And I think a DT 1990 is a very capable headphone. But if you can make your mix sound good on something bright, it's going to show you the flaws. It's going to show you those details.
It's funny. I didn't actually find the DT 1990 to be like super bright. I just found it to be that one spot. that one 8.5, like the Bayer peak right there. The rest of the tonality,
is a very, very difficult region though. When, like just in mixing, it's a region that it's very easy to let that region get out of control, and I kind of appreciate that because it forces you to keep it tame.
Absolutely, and that's why I say, like, even when I reviewed the DT 1990, which was not a favorable one, I said specifically for studio use for that reason. You want to be able to hear that frequency range specifically so that you can make it sound good on all the rest of the equipment that you have. And I think that's what they're going for. Yeah,
well, that's also why, because I do still appreciate, I primarily like the studios, but I do like it for a listening case, specifically because when I feel like when I'm using it, Um, I'm like, okay, this is almost definitively what an engineer at some point of the chain was hearing, and
Right.
it's kind of like getting to walk in their shoes through an album, so you can really listen to it and maybe not definitively, but more definitively say like, okay, at some point they were using something that probably adheres pretty well to diffuse field, and it's going to sound reasonably similar to this in the treble. So what I'm hearing is probably similar to what the engineer was hearing.
When you say diffuse field, which one do you mean?
I feel like H&M is a bit more of a generally accepted diffuse field for studio use, but
Yeah.
God knows there's so many variations now that it's getting to be a pain.
But I mean, so like we should probably talk about the target like frequency response curves, because like I know you have some interesting thoughts there. But like to me, I remember like for the longest time there's like consumer headphones that were bass monsters, and you see it now. You walk into any store and look at headphones, and it's always extra bass. And then you listen to audiophile headphones, and they were all what I would consider the H&M diffuse field or something like that.
Right.
You'd get maybe everything from Grados to even the HD800, which wasn't technically H&M, but it was brighter in that sense. And so now, even when I think about like, there's this sort of like ingrained idea that headphones, real audiophile headphones, should be this kind of diffuse field sound, even though most of the stuff that I listen to these days, like I wouldn't want to listen to it on that at all. And the stuff that I recommend is also like I can understand why, but I feel like it bites the bullet on like to the negative side of things on modern genres that really just don't sound that good. With like they'll sound a little bit shrill with that kind of.
Well, you look at some of if you go into the AES site and look at some old papers that Sean Olive did, you can see there's part of what he said was that it's diffuse field doesn't exist in real life, as does free field doesn't exist in real life either. And originally, one of their targets was to try and hit something between the two, because diffuse field, no one's gonna sit in a room that is made out of, perfectly infinitely reflective walls on all sides.
Well, but were they basing it off of like perfectly reflective on all sides, or were they basing it off of just because like part of me remembers this idea that it wasn't supposed to be perfectly reflective on all sides. It was just supposed to be somewhat reflective, right? As opposed to the dead sound of the free field.
Yes, and well, sorry. Gosh, I can't pronounce them. I feel terrible for not being able to pronounce it, but Hammershine and Muller. I can never pronounce it. It's just it escapes me for some reason.
Yeah. We're probably saying it wrong anyways, because those are Scandinavian names. Right,
which is already a bit outside of my wheelhouse. But I believe that is more based on a semi-realistic listening environment. I know that the traditional on paper idea of just diffuse field at its conception is a perfectly reflective room in which the sound reaching the listener is greater from the points of reflection than it is from the source.
Right.
Which is the polar opposite of free field, which is where you only have sound directly from the source and have no reflection. But I feel like either of those traditional base definitions doesn't exist.
Right.
And even then, I feel like a super reflective room isn't the ideal listening environment either, because obviously a reasonably treated room is going to sound great, and probably better according to most people, I feel like. But it depends on what sort of sound you're going for also, because I feel like, everyone always compares to live, and I like live recordings a lot, but live music, unless it's well recorded, doesn't sound that good.
No.
Like, you go and you listen to like your favorite band, and at best you might hear them on a set of really good EAWs or a JBL VRX line array, which is good for pro audio, but pro audio is not very hi-fi. Right. And then you're dealing with a massive space and delays and echoes and all kinds, and it's blasting so loud you can barely enunciate anything you're hearing. And then you're also at the mercy of the live sound engineer. Live music doesn't really sound that good in most cases, so it's already kind of a flawed reference.
Well, and even in those cases, it's not perfectly reflective. It's just somewhat reflective.
Right,
and it'll be varying
the larger
degrees
the
of reflective.
space,
Yeah.
the larger the space, and every single venue is different, designed differently. Older venues are designed specifically to be more reflective in ways to help amplify sounds coming off stage. Because we didn't, if you look at specifically, there was a place at Frisk in Nashville, which is a an old church that is now used as a orchestral concert hall. Same thing with the Skirmahorn in Nashville. They were designed architecturally in a time where loudspeakers were not a thing. So the acoustics of the building were specifically designed to amplify as much as possible the positioning of the stage. So when you combine that with loudspeakers or anything else, you're getting some very strange things happening that'll be different from place to place. And you compare that to your big arenas, and then compare that to your outdoor venues like Red Rocks, and compare that to your small clubs that people will play in, or coffee shops and everything else, and it's virtually impossible to have a live benchmark for what something should reference sound like, because every venue is going to be so different.
Too many factors, yeah.
So with that said, I mean, what's your take on what a target curve should look like?
It's a tough one.
Well, let's start with the Sean Olive. What you're going to say about
I like Harman. The original intention of the Harman target of creating something between our currently accepted diffuse field and free field standards. I do not as much like, for me personally, I understand the extreme usefulness of trying to hit a large target audience. I don't like the subjective additions and subtractions where they took a lot of people, both trained and untrained listeners, put knobs in front of them to adjust bass and treble to try and figure out what a lot of people like, if they like more bass or less bass. And if you look at the Harman target over time, every year they add more and more and more bass shelf to it. Not as much of a fan of that. I like the idea of, like I said, a curve somewhere between free field and diffuse field without the, I guess, subjective input on it. But here's the problem here is that everything is a bit subjective.
Sorry, when you say between free field and diffuse field, you mean principally, like in principle,
yes.
Not necessarily what the curves actually ended up looking like.
Yeah, I don't mean like take free field and diffuse field and average them. I mean, in a practical use case, something that would... Which is what the problem then is, you'd have to measure, hundreds of treated rooms with different types of microphones and different types of speakers to really get a good baseline even to begin with, and I don't think anyone's done that.
Well, with diffuse field, they didn't even base anything on preference at all. It would have been, right? So that's one of the reasons why you don't get the bass shelf that you do with the preference curves.
Yes.
But and so like when thinking of like what it might sound like if you had something that was in between, part of me feels like maybe a portion of the Harman frequency response gets close to that.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that in a lot of the excuse me, I feel like in a lot of the mid-range, the Harman target is like spot on. In certain parts of the highs, I feel like are spot on. Part of it has always sounded a little bit sucked out to me in part of the highs, but that's, I guess, because traditionally I've been more accustomed to diffuse field. I think that in a lot of ways they're on the right track. I just think that obviously AKG, Harman, they want to sell headphones.
It's market research.
That's their they want to reach as many people as possible. And because of that, you're going to want to make something that subjectively appeals to a mass audience.
And that's so I see somebody there says a tour's frequency response is perfect. I'm inclined to agree. It's pretty close to ideal for me. But yeah, the idea, I'm fine with Harman, and I like what the idea of preference research is. But my worry, maybe we can talk to Sean Olive at some point about this and ask him about this. But my
dog's going crazy because I have somebody here, so I'll have to run in just a minute.
Sure. But my biggest concern with Harman is that it is the ever encroaching bass shelf that shows up that isn't necessarily always appropriate,
right?
Because a lot and it's skewed because, and I feel it's skewed because of listener preference, listener bias.
Yeah.
And so
I find it particularly unpleasant, honestly.
Yeah, it ends up being
I'm not a bass head. Like when I watch movies, I love to have big subs and this and that and that. But growing up a lot, I used, like, in my car, and the cars I've driven, I had sound systems in it. I got my bass head phase over with, but I mean now, as much as this is probably gonna be a semi-controversial bit for me to say this, but I like the sub bass of the HD6XX, which is almost non-existent, but I can listen to it all day, and I get so used to it. It's not there. There's no sub bass on the 6XX, but I like it. It's not fatiguing at all whatsoever. Do I think that it's accurate? No. That's an entirely a subjective take. But me particularly, I feel like my subjective input on a curve would negatively impact it, because I would be saying, no, we need less than neutral bass on things.
Yeah.
So I don't think that my input or anyone else's subjective input can really make an objectively perfect curve if something were to exist.
Here we get to the point where we get to say that the best way to have an unfatiguing headphone is to have something that has no energy at the sound pressure level is 0, and therefore it's not fatiguing.
Just mid-range, that's it. You just wear it all day.
Just mid.
That's how old headphones were. Because one of my first headphones that I really, really got into for, like, when I was getting into hi-fi, quote quote, was the ESP9, which was a closed back electrostatic headphone made by Koss in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. And it was lush mid-range and nothing else, and I could listen to it all day long, any day, and never be tired of it.
That's funny. I've actually never heard of, like, sub bass being fatiguing, unless it's like bass drowning out everything else. But
right, I don't know exactly why it is, but I find bass, and this is such a strange take, I know. I find bass in a lot of cases to be more fatiguing than really sharp highs. And this is weird. Like, I was like, I didn't think this was right, and I go to an audiologist every year to get checkups and make sure I'm not losing hearing or going crazy. Mm-hmm. And I can still hear fine. My hearing still extends up. I mean, like, there's no music that's going to go all the way up to like 20 kilohertz, but I can still hear 20 kilohertz. It's there, but for some reason, I just find low frequencies to be more fatiguing. And I think this comes down to the biggest variable of all from person to person, which is the differences in anatomy between our ears from person to person. Mm-hmm. I feel like it has to be something along the lines of either how we as individuals are interpreting it in our brain, or how our ears adding different types of gain to it. Because just like I could say I could say a sentence or show you a color. I could show you a color and you could feel a certain way about it, and someone else might feel a completely different way about it.
This is probably a quality. This is the most interesting part, I think.
Right. Just like that, I could play a certain song and someone might like it, and someone else.
Yep.
Or, show you a bright light and someone might be like, wow, that's pretty. Someone else might be like, shut that off. Mm-hmm. It's interpretation and how we are trained to experience certain things, and I feel like low frequencies, high frequencies, all that is going to play into that to a certain extent, not necessarily in terms of what is neutral, but in terms of what we perceive as neutral from person to person, and what is going to fatigue and affect our listening experiences differently.
This is a problem that many philosophers have been trying to figure out for years.
Yeah.
And it's still talked about.
I've racked my brain on it endlessly. This is the cause of a lot of unrest, and I've thought about making videos about it before, but
we were discussing it too a little back.
But exactly.
I'm gonna have to run because I have a guest here. Sure. I got a lot of stuff going on today. We should do this again, because I feel like we could rant about this for hours and cover a lot more ground.
Yeah, and thanks so much for coming on. I know it's like on the weekend and stuff, so it's great to talk to you. And everybody, if you guys in the chat don't know who this is yet, go follow DMS. DMS3 TV is the channel. I'm sure most people already do. They're like, who's this Resolve guy? I don't know.
Well, hopefully we'll bring you some more viewers on this, because like I said, I want to see more channels growing in audio. The more people we have covering it from more angles, the more differences of opinion, the more just everything here and there we can get all collectively. I feel like it's going to help.
Yeah, I agree.
Audio grow as a whole. So I want to see more of this. So if you're one of my viewers who come over to this, then check these guys out more.
Well, I appreciate that. We'll talk to you again soon. I'll see you at CanJam in New York.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna hop off here. I'll see you then, man.
Alrighty. Alrighty.
All right, bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Alrighty, and that is gonna do it for the stream. Whoa, Tyler is big here. That's great. Alrighty, we'll see all of you guys later. Thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned for the next one.
Yeah, have a good one.